Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we're doing a deep dive, really getting into one of the most, significant and maybe often misunderstood words in the Old Testament. It's a concept that's just absolutely central to biblical theology. But, in modern usage, it often gets kind of flattened out, doesn't it, into just one, usually inadequate English word.
That's spot on, yeah. We're focusing today on the Hebrew term, or Tsedaqah. Now, if you've seen this in English Bibles, you probably see righteousness most often, or maybe justice. But honestly, limiting it just to those, it misses the huge scope of what it originally meant.
Right. So our mission today is really to break Tsedaqah free from any single narrow definition. We want to show you the whole spectrum, what this concept means across the ancient sources, everything from just basic honesty between neighbors all the way to the legal declaration of someone's innocence, and then, bigger still, to God's massive covenant-keeping action that actually brings about salvation.
And what's really compelling right from the get-go is just how often this term shows up. It really demonstrates how central it was to ancient Israelite thinking. Our research shows Tsedakah appears 157 times in the Old Testament, and that's not even counting related forms. So yeah, this isn't some minor word on the sidelines. It's like a structural pillar of the whole biblical worldview. It defines human behavior, judicial standards, and God's own character all at the same time.
Okay, so let's start with the linguistic roots. Because, like a lot of these core Hebrew concepts, Tsedakah isn't really an island, is it? It's part of a whole family of related terms, and they sort of define each other.
That's definitely the best way to get a handle on it. The noun itself, tzedakah, comes from the verb root, tzedek, and that root basically means to be just or to be righteous. So from that verb, you get the noun, the concept, tzedakah, and you also get the adjective, tzadik, that describes the person, the just one, the righteous person. These terms all work together. They describe the standard, the state of meeting that standard, and the action that comes from that state.
And when we look at how this idea sort of traveled through history and into nearby cultures, we start to see how the meaning got narrower over time, especially how it often became just charity in modern understanding.
Exactly, yeah. If you trace the word in related Semitic languages, you can actually see that evolution. In Aramaic and Syriac, the concepts often kind of hover around justice and piety. But then look at the related word in Arabic, adhering. That specifically means alms or voluntary contribution. That shift, focusing just on the ethical duty of giving to the poor, it became more and more central in later traditions. It shows up in Mishnaic Hebrew and Jewish Aramaic, meaning leniency or alms.
So the modern idea that tzedakah basically just means charity, that's really a later development, stemming from focusing on just one specific outcome of being righteous.
Absolutely. It wasn't the original core meaning at all. The original core is much more about loyalty, specifically loyalty to the community and loyalty to the covenant. It's about rectitude, honesty, just in general conduct, a kind of measure of upright, blameless interaction that keeps the covenant relationship intact.
Can you give a solid example of that kind of core communal honesty idea?
Sure. Think about Jacob when he's negotiating his wages with Laban back in Genesis 30. Jacob says something like, in the future, if Laban finds him taking anything that isn't his, my Tsedakah shall answer for me. Now, he's not talking about charity there or some legal decision. He's talking about his own verifiable honesty, his rectitude in their business dealings. It's his loyal, honest character that will speak for itself. We also see this when Solomon praising his father David for walking before God in Tsedakah in 1 Kings 3:6. It's about a consistent life, a life following right behavior.
I also noticed a really powerful connection in 1 Samuel 26.23. Their tzedakah is used right alongside emunah, faithfulness. That pairing seems to really anchor the concept in covenant relationship, doesn't it?
It connects everything, absolutely. If the word just meant some kind of abstract goodness, you wouldn't need to link it so tightly with emunah, with faithfulness. Faithfulness really defines tzedakah. You're being righteous towards someone, God, or your neighbor, by showing loyalty to the relationship, the agreement that's already established. It's fundamentally a relational duty, this loyal rectitude, this honesty. It's the very behavior that builds and keeps peace within the community.
Okay, that idea of loyalty, of upholding the established order, that leads us straight into the human realm, right? Law and governance. So let's transition now to how Tsedakah works in the courtroom and, on the throne.
Yeah, when we shift to human governance, Tsedakah becomes the essential behavior for judges and kings. It's not just like a nice virtue to have. It's the active mechanism that establishes social order, that protects the vulnerable, A king's primary job, really, is to make sure the standards of Tsedaqah are being met.
And the sources show this again and again in descriptions of good kingship. Like 2 Samuel 8.15 and 1 Kings 10.9 describe David and Solomon doing exactly that, executing justice and righteousness, mishpat and tzedakah for their people. That makes it pretty clear that righteous rule needs more than just making fair decisions.
Precisely. And this is where that critical connection with mishpat, judgment, or justice really comes into focus. These two words are a powerful pair. They show up together all the time. Mishpat is often the legal decision, the judicial ruling, the right verdict, let's say. Tsedakah is then the ethical carrying out of that ruling. It's the resulting right action that actually holds the social fabric together.
Okay, so if mishpat is like the blueprint, then tzedakah is the actual construction, following the plan.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. Think about the prophet Amos in chapter 5. He cries out against those who turn mishpat to wormwood and cast down Tsedakah to the earth. See? The legal decision, mishpat, gets corrupted, twisted, and therefore the right action that should follow Tsedakah is just abandoned, thrown away. Similarly, Isaiah 9.6 talks about the future Messiah ruling with mishpat and Tsedakah. This establishes a throne based not just on wise decisions, but on actively making sure those decisions result in rectitude and loyalty for everyone under his rule.
Wow, that really highlights how fundamental this concept is for political stability. Proverbs 16.1 ties the stability of the state directly to this standard.
It does. The source literally says the throne is established by Tsedakah. If the ruler fails to administer loyal ethical action, if they compromise their honesty or fail to protect the community, their reign basically loses its legitimacy. Yeah. The standard of Tsedakah is, in essence, the constitution of covenant government.
And beyond just the king and the judges, the same standard applies down to individual ethics, right? It seems like the baseline for how anyone is supposed to live under the covenant.
That's exactly right. This moves it from the sort of political sphere right into the personal. Every individual is required to show this ethical behavior. Jeremiah 22.3 demands that people execute mishpat and tzedakah, especially looking out for the vulnerable, the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow. Ezekiel 18.5 defines the righteous man as someone who has done what is lawful and right, specifically pointing to ethical treatment of others. It's the standard of blameless behavior. It's what's expected of every single member of the community.
I find that specific phrase, asa tzedakah, to do righteousness, really interesting here. It takes it from being an abstract idea and makes it something you can actually see, something tangible.
It does. We see that phrase quite often, like in Isaiah 56.1 and Psalm 106.3. The concept can't just stay a philosophical ideal. It has to translate into real, tangible action. It stresses that living righteously is about continuous, observable loyalty to the covenant standard. You don't just have the quality of Tsedakah, you perform the acts of Tsedakah.
Speaking of action, one of the most surprising uses of Tsedakah in the sources, for me anyway, was when it refers to a specific legal entitlement, a claim someone has. This really brings out the forensic, the legal side of the word.
Oh yeah, this is a fantastic example of just how precise the word can be. Think it's 6 Samuel 19.29. Mephibosheth, Saul's descendant, is talking to David, and he says, "What right have I anymore?" That word for right, or Tsedakah. In that context, it doesn't mean moral goodness. It means his legal claim, his due, his entitlement based on past agreements, and his status as, a royal heir. It's his demonstrable legal standing.
So it's not just saying he's a good guy. It's saying he has a claim that should be upheld in court legally.
Exactly. It's a statement about an enforceable legal standing. And we see this same structure applied later, but in the divine realm. In Nehemiah 2.20, the adversaries are told they have no claim, no Tsedakah to the promises of the covenant. And, maybe most significantly, Isaiah 54.17 talks about God's people having a Tsedakah, a right, or a claim to salvation, to vindication from God himself. So the structure of the earthly court is used to describe God's ultimate declaration about his people's standing. Okay, before we move completely over to God's action, let's just nail down the plural use. Tsedakah. When it's plural, we're talking about specific concrete actions, right? Not the abstract quality. Yes, exactly. The plural Tsedakah shifts away from the abstract quality and really focuses on righteous deeds, or just acts. The sources confirm this. These are defined as man's deeds of loyalty to the community. They're the observable results, the fruit of living by that ethical standard. Judges 5.01, for instance, refers to God's Tsedakah, his specific acts of justice and deliverance for his people. So the plural gives us the visible track record, you could say, of right behavior, whether it's human or divine.
That makes a perfect transition then for Section 3. Now we're looking at Tsedakah not just as something humans have to do, but as the governing, saving action of God himself. If humans are called to show loyalty, God basically is loyalty.
Absolutely. Tsedakah defines God's essential character. Psalm 36.7 praises God's tzedakah, his justice. He is the ultimate administrator. And the phrase that confirms his rule is that God asa mishpat tzedakah. He administers justice and righteousness. We see that in Psalm 99.4, Jeremiah 9.23. He's the source, and he's the enforcer of all righteous order.
Now, when we look at how God applies his tzedakah, we have to deal with kind of a dual nature, right? It seems to cover both punishment and redemption.
Has to, yes. Because God's goal is righteous order, his tzedakah must address disorder. So on one hand, yes is shown in punitive action. Isaiah 5.16 describes God being lifted up, exalted as the holy God through judgment by cleansing the wicked. Daniel 9.7 talks about God's justice tzedakah being demonstrated even in the condemnation and exile of his own people. It confirms that the covenant standard holds, no matter the outcome for those who break it.
But for the covenant community, the concept leans much more often towards redemptive action, doesn't it? God's loyalty shown through deliverance. This is where Tsedaqah really starts to sound almost synonymous with salvation.
This is so critical, especially to the prophetic message. God's justice isn't just abstract fairness. It's his covenant faithfulness, and that faithfulness results in salvation. It's about bringing things back into right relationship. And for his people, that means rescue. It means vindication. Look at Isaiah 54.1 again. The ultimate security of God's servants is declared right there. Their final vindication, their right standing, is their tzedakah from Yahweh. God's action creates the right relationship.
And the sources back this up by pairing Tsedaqah directly with words meaning rescue or deliverance.
They do, repeatedly. We constantly see Tsedaqah parallel with Teshua, which means salvation or deliverance.
Isaiah 46.12 says, I bring near my Tsedaqah, it shall not be far off, and my salvation, Teshua, shall not tarry. The two concepts are basically fused together. God's commitment to right order for his people just is their salvation. His righteous character demands their deliverance.
All right, this is where it gets really interesting for me, because God's tzedakah doesn't seem limited just to covenant relationships. It seems to govern the whole creation. I saw that reference in Joel 2.23, connecting God's justice to the weather.
Yes. That example is wonderful because it stretches the idea of God's righteous governance out across the entire cosmos. Joel 2.23 talks about God giving the early rain according to right, or litzedakah. This means rain in the right measure, exactly what the land needs to flourish. You know, if rain comes too hard, it destroys things. If it's too light, you get drought. God's Tsedaqah ensures cosmic balance and blessing.
Right.
It shows that the whole physical world operates under the rule of God's moral standard. Wow. So when people experience blessing, whether it's, say, winning a battle or having a good harvest, they're actually experiencing God's Tsedaqah in action.
Precisely. And just like with human actions, God has plural tzedakot, specific observable acts of justice. These refer to God's powerful redemptive deeds that confirm his covenant promises. In 1 Samuel 12.7, Samuel calls the people to stand before the Lord while he recounts the Tsedaqah, the acts of justice that the Lord performed for them and their ancestors. Psalm 103.6 confirms it. The Lord executes Tsedaqah for all who are oppressed. These aren't passive virtues, they're active events in history.
Okay, this powerful idea of God actively making things right, this takes us to the theological heart of our discussion, justification. This is obviously central to Reformed theology, and it seems to hinge entirely on the legal application of this word root, tzedakah.
This is the pivotal move.
Yes.
We have to go back to the verb tzedakah, because justification is, first and foremost, a legal declaration. When the verb is used in its simple form, it usually means something like to have a just cause or to be in the right. Job 9.15 uses it like this. It's the plea of someone claiming innocence. Though I am in the right, I cannot answer him. I must appeal for mercy. He's asking to be declared in the right.
But the real judicial action, the declaration itself, comes from that causative form, right?
Yes, the hunter-fill form, max hitstick. This means to declare righteous or to justify. Deuteronomy 25.1 describes the judge's job. To hitstick the righteous person, the tzaddik, and condemn the wicked. This is the forensic act of clearing someone's name, declaring them acquitted based on their legal standing.
And what's fascinating, especially when you think about God's mercy later, is how strictly the opposite is forbidden in the human courtroom.
Oh, it's absolutely forbidden. Proverbs 17.15 states it plainly. He who justifies the wicked, Rasha, and he who condemns the righteous, they are both equally an abomination to the Lord. Exodus 23.7 is just as strict. The human court cannot compromise truth just for convenience or mercy. The judge must make the declaration align with the reality of the person's actions.
Okay, wait a minute, though. If the human judicial system is strictly forbidden from declaring the wicked righteous, how does a just God ever achieve the goal of justifying the ungodly? Doesn't this create a kind of paradox that these sources have to resolve somehow?
That paradox is the very engine driving the whole covenant plan. You've hit on it. It sets up this huge legal tension that only God himself can possibly solve. If God just stuck rigidly to the human judicial model, well, everyone, being flawed, would end up condemned. The solution to this legal and moral puzzle is revealed right there in Genesis 15.6.
Ah, now we arrive at the verse. The
Yeah.
one that really anchors Reformed thinking about faith and righteousness.
Genesis 15.6 says that Abraham believed the Lord, and God reckoned it to him for Tsedakah. Now, this statement is just a monumental shift away from any kind of works-based righteousness. The key Hebrew verb there for reckoned is chashav. It's basically an accounting term. It means to count, to calculate, or, importantly, to credit.
So it's like a legal or maybe a financial transfer, a declaration made from the outside. It's not about what Abraham inherently was, but what God legally declared him to be based on his belief.
Precisely. Think about the standard back in Deuteronomy 6.25. There, Tsedakah is defined as the reward you get for meticulously keeping the law. It will be Tsedaqah for us if we are careful to observe all this commandment. But Abraham lived centuries before that law was given, yet he received Tsedaqah. How? Not by his own perfect merit, but by simple, trusting faith in God's promise. God counted Abraham's faith as the sufficient ground for his righteous standing.
Okay, so this is the core doctrine of imputation then. God takes that necessary legal righteousness, that tzedakah that Abraham doesn't have on his own, and he credits it to Abraham's account. What? Because of his faith.
That's the key takeaway for you right there. It's a gracious judicial act. The forensic declaration of acquittal to Hitzdik is made. It satisfies the requirement of God's own perfect standard. But the grounds for that acquittal are transferred, imputed, to the believer through faith. And this resolves that tension we saw from Proverbs 17.15. God can justify the ungodly without compromising his own justice, because the true grounds for the tzedakah are actually provided somewhere else.
And this points us directly to the prophetic connection with the servant figure.
Yes, Isaiah 53.11 describes the servant of the Lord as the one who actually performs that transfer. It says, by his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many. The servant performs the hitzdik, the act of vindicating, of saving others through a vicarious act. He does it for them. This connects God's ultimate saving tzedakah back to a specific figure who takes the condemnation but provides the grounds for righteousness.
It really is quite remarkable how one single root word can bridge everything from human business deals to legal judgments and all the way to the deepest theological concepts of salvation. Okay, let's move to our final section now and look at the people who are defined by this standard. The tzaddik.
Right. The adjective tzaddik describes a person who lives according to this standard of loyalty and rectitude. They're characterized by innocence of offense, by having a just cause, and by having a right relationship with God. They are the ethical, the moral anchors of the community. And they're constantly contrasted with the wicked, the rasha, throughout the Old Testament. We see that in Exodus 23.8, for example.
And we see this description applied right from the very beginning, don't we? Genesis 7.1 describes Noah as a tzaddik before the flood. And Genesis 18.23 frames that famous conversation between Abraham and God about Sodom and Gomorrah. The whole fate of the city hangs on whether there are enough tzaddikim there.
And their identity isn't just internal, it's meant to be visible. The Psalms use these descriptive phrases to capture their communal reality. They talk about the tents of the righteous in Psalm 118.1 fin, and they contrast the safe way of the righteous with the path of the wicked that just crumbles in Psalm 1.6. Their life path looks different because they are trying to maintain loyalty to the covenant.
And the way this idea just saturated the culture is confirmed by how often the root shows up in people's names. This wasn't just some abstract religious concept, it was part of everyday identity.
That's a really powerful cultural marker, yeah. Names based on the root Zadok were quite common. Think of Zadok, Zaduk. It means just or righteous. He was that key priest who stayed loyal to David during Absalom's rebellion and then became the high priest under Solomon. His name signified stability, loyalty, and government.
And then there's that intense historical irony wrapped up in the name Zedekiah.
Oh, the irony there is just, well, it's tragic, really. Tsedaqah, Sidqayahu, literally means YHWH is righteousness. And this name was given to the very last king of Judah. the man whose faithlessness, whose political scheming led directly to Jerusalem's destruction by Babylon. That's recorded in 2 Kings 24.17. His name was this profound statement about God's standard, but his life was a complete contradiction of it. That disconnect between his name and his actions, it's one of the most poignant examples of human failure in the whole Old Testament story.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's try to summarize the main insight we hope you, the listener, take away from all this. Tzedakah is so much more than just a simple synonym for charity or even just goodness.
Indeed, yeah. We've seen that tzedakah is this dynamic word that defines standards across really three main spheres. It's the legal standard required of judges and really all people. It's the blameless behavior, the honesty expected within the community. And maybe most importantly, it's God's sovereign covenant-keeping action that both governs the entire cosmos and rescues his people.
And the word somehow manages this incredible feat of linking that external communal loyalty, the ethical demand directly with internal imputed justification. Like we saw so clearly in Genesis 15.6, we receive a justified standing before God, not because of our own tzedakah, but through a tzedakah that is reckoned or credited to us.
Right. And this leads us to our final question, something for you to really think about. If God's tzedakah is his faithfulness that saves us, that makes us righteous in his sight, like Isaiah 46.whole says, then what does that imply for the resulting human tzedakah? You know, those ethical deeds mentioned back in Isaiah 56.1. If righteousness is something we receive as a gift, how should that change our understanding of the good works that follow? Is our goal just to sort of check off the legal list, or is it to visibly reflect the loyal, righteous character that we've now been credited with? What does that look like?